Thank you, Jared. Vice Governor, Vice Minister, and to my colleagues of the International Recovery Forum, thank you for the opportunity of speaking with you and sharing some of our insights from the Australian context. What I would like to do is certainly recognise the contribution this forum has made to recovery in Australia over the years, and our engagement has been going on since 2011. I think it's a common theme across the globe that we describe disasters now as unprecedented and catastrophic. I prefer to refer to them as trigger points that changes our thinking and our approach to disaster resilience and building back better so that we are able to support our communities in the aftermath of a disaster. And I think we're all aware, 2019-2020 bushfire season in Australia has been a defining moment and is a trigger point for the nation in terms of how we deal with catastrophic climate-induced events. It has had unprecedented impacts across the nation. Over 16 million hectares of land has been burnt. We are approaching 3,000 homes destroyed, and there have been massive impacts to our economy, to our environment, and to our critical infrastructure. This is on top of the 1 in 500-year event that we had last year that impacted, a flooding event that impacted over 2/3 of the state I come from in Queensland. And 2 years prior to that, a severe tropical cyclone, Debbie, which also impacted our communities. So it is fair to say that we have moved from a cyclical to trend impact of disasters in our part of the world. And what I'd like to share with you is probably the most oft-asked questions of us from a recovery and also policy and resilience-focused agency. And that question the community asks us regularly is, as we continue to pour billions and billions of dollars into our recovery, what is it you are doing to make our lives safer and making our critical infrastructure, our economy and our environment more able to handle events into the future? And this has guided our thinking and our work in Australia. Firstly, to give you some context, Queensland spans a vast and diverse landscape. We have 5.1 million people, nearly 7,000 kilometres of coastline in probably the most climatically sensitive area of the South Pacific. We have 77 local government areas consisting of rural, remote, Indigenous, island, coastal and urban communities. And the reality for us is that 75% of our population lives on the coast or on a floodplain. Since 2017, 75 of our 77 council areas have been impacted by a disaster and have been involved in recovery. 2/3 of those councils have experienced multiple events in the last 3 years. So they are in a system of perpetual recovery, and when you overlay on top of that the chronic stresses such as drought, water security, access to government services, damage to critical infrastructure, and the urban drift that we are seeing from many, many of our regional areas, you can see that building back better and discussions about resilience are important to the functioning and recovery of our communities as they do recover from disasters now and into the future. It is fair to say our thinking and our approach from an investment and a policy perspective now not only is focused on mitigation, but also is targeted on adaptation as well. So we take into account those already wired-in impacts on our climate and the impacts it will have on our communities and our weather systems into the future. Our first lesson is, and Kamal touched on this earlier today, we are heavily invested now in taking and developing a regional resilient approach. So we have shifted from a state-led focus on recovery and reconstruction to now engaging much more closely with the community so that we understand what is valuable to them, what is vulnerable, what parts of critical infrastructure, what parts of the environment, what parts of their economic systems are vulnerable to change and disaster into the future. And it allows us to target those communities. And it allows us to target not only policy settings, but investment. And importantly, one of the key lessons that we are learning through that development of regional resilience strategies is the lack of capability and capacity that exist in many, many of our regional communities. And a big part of our work now is providing that capability, capacity, and also investment into more resilient infrastructure. We're able, through this approach, to provide that direct line of sight from a local level resilience plan all the way through to state, national and international recovery and resilience building frameworks. And I think that's very, very important if we are to be successful at the local level and we are able to handle the increased impacts of disaster into the future. We must have that clear line of sight and certainly be able to harness the energy that exists at a local level. We focus very heavily in Queensland on data and risk. We marry historic reconstruction data and overlay historic and future risk modelling so that we understand how our infrastructure networks, our economic networks behave during a disaster, after a disaster, and when we overlay the future risk, that we get an understanding of what we need to prioritise into the future. We understand at a state and a local level how vulnerable our infrastructure systems are, and we take into account, and we have data now down to a 10-kilometre space throughout the state. We take into account the location, asset type and design, its historic cost of repair, its socio-economic value to the community, and also its future exposure. And this allows us to prioritise investment. It allows us to make policy settings that incorporates this information based on historical basis and also into the future. Also, it allows us to take a systems approach to understanding our network. If we are engaged at a regional level, then we understand that a highway 1,000 kilometres from the port to its east has a massive impact on the ability of a particular community that was flooded here to recover. So that particular highway, the Flinders Highway, out here to the west, was damaged as a result of the flooding. It joins our mineral provinces here in the left to our ports in the right, providing employment, providing economic growth and services to the region as a whole. If we understand how our infrastructure performs out here and what is required in this part of the country, we'll be able to build back better so that we're much prepared for future events into the future. That's an example of the Flinders Highway to the asset I was just showing you, but certainly our approach in this space is to actually prioritise investment in betterment, resilience building across this part of the network, because we know that it'll have a massive impact to the east and into much larger urban conurbations that exist to the west. Building back better is not always about choosing the highest cost option. Rather, it's about choosing the option that is better fit for purpose to the community and also to the economy. In this case, we're raising a major arterial road to achieve flood immunity is particularly important when that road is required to continue operating during event and during a disaster to keep that community safe and to ensure it is supplied with all its essential needs during a disaster. It ensures that that road can be recovered quickly after an event. However, what we have seen in taking that regional and strategic approach, that there may be suitable alternative roads that can service a community during the aftermath of a disaster. And it may be better to design a road to withstand flooding rather than raising the road to avoid flooding. Fit for need solutions is about understanding current and future risk, as well as understanding both the tangible and intangible importance of an asset to the community. And finally, it's about checking with that community that they fully understand how that asset will operate during and after an event. And we have made mistakes along the way. I think it is fair to say we design to fail safely now has been an important lesson that we have learnt over the last 10 years. And I've identified an asset in the top left-hand corner. Our solution was to lift the road, to increase culvert size so we could get flow through and try and lift the asset out of the flood line. It cost a lot of money though, that particular mistake. So now what we do is we build so it fails early, but it is still there once the waters recede. And that is communicated clearly to the community so that they understand how that asset will perform during and after an event and how long it will be out of service for. It's fair to say that resilience building and building back better is complex, but our governance, our funding and our strategic approach to dealing with resilience doesn't need to be. Success comes when we truly enable a locally led approach to building back better that is supported by higher levels of government with resources and funding. It's about finding shared solutions to common problems by assessing resilience building through a multi-criteria rather than placing all emphasis on the economic impacts. And I'd like to leave you with one thought which we have learnt from our approach in Queensland. I think we already have the tools to make our infrastructure fit for need in light of current and future climate risk. The current challenge is about getting greater alignment in terms of our policy, our funding and decision making to ensure that we have an integrated and a systematic approach to building back better. It's about bringing into stronger alignment our process for climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, land use planning, economic development to ensure that our resilient infrastructure is truly risk-informed and fit for need and services the needs of our community. Thank you.